And as we continue the Women's Day coverage, we now delve into a very critical topic, which is, of course, the representation of women in the fields of politics and the corporate world. As we celebrate the achievements as well as contributions of women around the globe, it's also a moment to reflect on the strides that we've currently made and the challenges that remain. And from the corridors of power to the boardrooms of major corporations, women are breaking barriers and reshaping the landscape. But how far have we really come? Let's look at the progress that has been made, the ongoing disparities, and the voices leading the charge for a more inclusive society and future with Advocate Nthabiseng Sepenya-Mogale, who's the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality. Advocate, a very good afternoon to you and happy Women's Day to you. Thank you so much. So let's first look at what are some of the core hindrances to the advancement as well as promotion of equality in fields like your politics. We are just celebrating our first female Chief Justice. But how long do you think these changes will actually take to effect any positive change?
It has taken a bit longer than one would have expected, in the sense that 30 years later we have a female Chief Justice. But let us not forget that as early as 1994, in the panel of 11 judges, we already had 2. And ever since, up to now, we have had judges sitting on the women judges sitting on the constitutional law bench. So I think what we are celebrating is that this person now, who is a woman, is taking over to run things, to be the manager of all the courts. But the judges have actually been going up and they're available. Lastly, I just want to point out that it's worth celebrating because we are choosing women with a particular caliber, with bringing a particular skill and confident and on merit. It's not only gender.
Absolutely, Advocate. Now, interesting to note is that the liberating movement, which is the ANC, with its female wing, has fallen short of being at the forefront sometimes, or got criticism of falling short of advancing it, as well as implementing these key as well as critical changes of inclusivity and equality. Yet we are yet to see a female president or even intensive support by the Women's League against issues of patriarchy. And it seems that their own voices are somehow being stifled or ignored.
Unfortunately, yes, the women's voices in politics, especially leadership, become expendable. You know, the first people to go now, even with Government of National Unity, has been all the parties reducing their number of women representatives. But fortunately for the ANC, they've been the only party who has now shifted to 52% of their representation in parliament being women. So that in itself is good, but others have actually redressed. You know, and with the parties that have redressed, the attitude has been completely wrong, where people will say, we are not going to look at gender, we're looking at merit, as though once you're talking women, you're not talking merit, you're talking people who are just being accommodated. No, there are a lot of women with a leadership, of a leadership caliber, who can take this country forward. After all, in 1994, you had 26% of representation in parliament being women, and almost all of them, in fact, not almost all of them, were women of caliber who had been chosen on merit. And just by the way, it was found out, okay, 26% of them are women.
And Advocate, I mean, this seems to be the culture that seems to resonate and actually perpetuate across all sectors whenever there is actually calls for women to be recognized. These calls are somehow just overlooked or stifled, even by some women themselves. I mean, we still have an economy that is still largely male-dominated across the various fields as well as sectors. You're still hearing 30 years into democracy about certain fields that are just reserved for males in this country.
Yes, some are reserved for males in the country and others say we are open, but then you go in there, they frustrate you. For example, young women lawyers, I find it hard to find articles sometimes after they qualify. Women advocates find it hard to get big cases after they qualify because everybody just feels, they'll be going and having babies and getting married and this and that. We're not going to invest in them. Women doctors, the safety in our hospitals now, it's now not unheard of for a doctor at a hospital to be walking in the corridors and get attacked and molested sexually. So the systemic challenges are still there, and people give all sorts of excuses why they cannot actually break those barriers.
Absolutely, Advocate. So what is the mentality that you feel still needs to be changed and adopted in order to provide for this much needed change, especially in key decision-making roles like in your politics, and also maybe just touch on some of the most formidable as well as recognizable gains that we have actually achieved as a country in ensuring the inclusivity of women?
Some of the things that we have achieved up to so far that may sound controversial because they have actually been misinterpreted is BEE itself, in the sense that it enabled to change the mindset that you need to have an intentional bias towards bringing on board Black people into the economy. And that is what has got to happen with regards to issues of gender. But secondly, people need to understand that bringing on board certain groups is not necessarily meaning you are excluding those that have been there. It actually is saying open, make a bigger table, allocate more chairs. But the system tends to stay the same. So people should actually not feel threatened, but rather to understand it's just making room on the same table for more people.
Absolutely. And speaking of Black women, and in closing, very quickly, Advocate, I mean, there was a call to emancipate the women in rural areas who feel that they have been largely left behind in terms of economic participation or education and getting that viable accessibility to compete in the jobs market as well as in key decision-making roles. So what do you think government still needs to focus on pertaining to the advancement of women that are in far-flung areas as well as remote and rural areas?
There government needs to do a lot. For example, physical infrastructure, roads, technology, accessibility of services, accessibility of where people can get recourse when they, when they cannot get assistance. So there's a whole lot that can be done. It's one thing to actually say women in the rural areas must stand up and come. Come where they take 3 hours to drive from one place to the other. I'm actually now from Pof Ada. Pof Ada is 2.5 hours from Uppington, and you have to have a means of transport to be able to come to urban areas like Uppington, 6 hours away from Kimberley. You have to have a means of transportation. You've got to have the financial resources to be able to. So there's a need to go out in terms of job opportunities, economic development out of urban areas into those far-flung areas so that people are actually able to access them on their doorstep rather than the other way around.
Advocate, once again, a happy Women's Day to you. Thank you so much for driving this far to get connectivity, to have this accessibility to us for this interview this afternoon. That is Advocate Nthabiseng Sepenya-Mogale, the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality.